There is a particular kind of silence that precedes a catastrophe. It's dense, viscous, like the air before a thunderstorm, when even the birds fall silent in anticipation of the first clap of thunder. That night, the silence in our home was exactly like that. I stood at the panoramic window in my living room, looking out at the scatter of Manhattan's lights, which seemed as cold and distant as stars. In my glass, whiskey swirled. The very same 18-year-old Macallan my father, David Miller, only opened to mark a triumph. Tomorrow was supposed to be just such an occasion. Tomorrow he was going to announce my older brother, James, as the new CEO of Miller Industries. And I was drinking to what I already knew. My wife, Catherine, said she was going to visit her sick sister in Connecticut. I knew her sister was perfectly healthy. The 3 a.m. phone call, hung up after the first ring, wasn't a mistake, it was a signal. Their signal. I had learned to recognize their code, just as a trader recognizes patterns on a stock chart. The little lies, the sudden headaches, the meetings with friends that dragged on for hours. At first, I pushed these thoughts away, blaming my own paranoia, the shadow my brilliant, confident brother James invariably cast. The firstborn, the heir. But suspicions, like mold, grow in the dark. So I turned on the light. I didn't hire private investigators. That would have been too messy and too simple. I am Ethan Miller, a systems architect. I see patterns. I found it. I hacked into Catherine's cloud storage using a password she thought was our little secret, the date of our first date. The irony was so bitter it made my jaw ache. Inside was a folder carelessly named projects. There were no blueprints or sketches in it, only photographs, dozens of them, my brother and my wife. In hotels, I could identify by the pattern on the carpet. In the apartment James kept in Soho for meetings with partners. On the yacht our father had given us both for Christmas. In every photo, they were laughing, not just smiling. Laughing the way people do when they share a single soul between them. The way Catherine and I hadn't laughed in years. The last picture was taken a few days ago. She was lying in bed, wrapped in a sheet, and on the bedside table was a half-empty bottle of wine and 2 glasses. I recognized those glasses. They were from our home, which meant they had done it here. In our bed. I closed the laptop. Something inside me snapped with a dry crack. There were no screams, no tears. Only cold. A bone-chilling, crystalline cold that froze the blood in my veins and turned my heart into a shard of ice. I suddenly understood that the love I felt for her wasn't a solid structure, but a house of cards. One push, and it all collapsed, leaving nothing but a void. And in that void, a purpose was born. Revenge is a dish best served cold. A cliché, but it holds the entire truth. Hot, furious revenge is for losers. It's impulsive, messy, and leaves traces. True revenge is a game of chess, where every move is calculated 10 steps ahead. It is an art. It's what I do best. James was always the face of the company, its charisma. I was its brain, the invisible force that built the systems that earned us billions. He knew how to charm people. I knew how to see through them. I finished my whiskey. Tomorrow's dinner was meant to be James's coronation. Instead, it would become his scaffold. And not just his. If you're going to burn bridges, let the flames be visible from space. I was going to burn our entire rotten world, built on lies, to the ground. And I knew where to start. I went to my office, sat down at my computer, and entered the access password for the Miller Industries internal servers. My clearance level was the highest. My father always said he trusted me implicitly with the technical side of the business. What an irony. I started digging. Not in James's personal files. That would be too obvious. I went into the financial reports for the last 5 years. I was looking for anomalies, deviations, those barely perceptible patterns that betray a lie. And I found them. This wasn't just corporate corruption. It was an abyss. The next 24 hours I spent in a strange, feverish trance. Sleep was an unaffordable luxury. Coffee and icy rage fueled me. I delved deeper and deeper into the digital entrails of our family empire. And what I found made the betrayal of James and Catherine seem like a childish squabble in a sandbox. The first red flag was a shell company, Ethelred Holdings, registered in the Cayman Islands. Large sums were regularly transferred to its accounts from a Miller Industries fund under the guise of consulting services. Tens of millions of dollars. James was too lazy and arrogant for such a complex scheme. This was my father's handiwork. David Miller, the patriarch, a paragon of honesty and business ethics. The man who spoke of legacy and reputation at every board meeting. I traced the flow of funds from Ethelred's accounts. Part of it went to bribes, to senators, to officials at the Environmental Protection Agency. This explained why our old factories in Ohio, which spewed tons of toxic waste into the river, passed every inspection year after year. We weren't just buying silence. We were buying the right to poison the land people lived on. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. The largest transactions, regular as clockwork, went to the personal account of a woman named Sophia O'Connell. I quickly found information about her. A widow. Her husband, Michael O'Connell, had worked as a shift supervisor at that same Ohio factory 20 years ago. According to the official version, he died in an accident. He fell into a vat of chemicals. The case was closed very quickly. The family was paid a generous compensation. Now I saw the truth. This wasn't severance pay. It was a lifetime salary for silence. Michael O'Connell hadn't fallen. He had likely known too much about the real volume of emissions and decided to talk. And my father, my righteous father, had silenced him. Forever. The air in my office grew thick and heavy. I could smell the lies, as old as the foundation of this house. My father was a murderer. Perhaps not by his own hands, but he gave the order. He built our empire on the bones of a common worker. Every dollar we spent, every luxurious dinner, every elite educational institution, it was all paid for with blood. In that moment, my personal pain from my wife and brother's betrayal faded into the background. It didn't disappear, no. It just became part of something much larger, uglier, and all-consuming. This was no longer just the revenge of a cheated husband. This was justice. But I didn't stop. I was driven by some dark, insatiable thirst to get to the very bottom. If my father was capable of this, what was my mother capable of? Eleanora Miller, the embodiment of cold elegance and impeccable taste. She always kept her distance, her love measured and conditional. She approved or disapproved, praised success, but never comforted in failure, especially towards me. James was her son. I was a distant planet in her orbit. I always thought it was me, that I wasn't good enough, not enough like my father. I decided to search my father's study at our country house. That's where he kept old archives he had never digitized. I told the house staff I needed to pick up some childhood things. Lying was becoming easier and easier for me. Behind the massive oak desk, in a hidden drawer I'd known about since childhood, I found not financial documents, but a cigar box tied with a faded ribbon. Inside were letters, yellowed with brittle edges. They were letters from a doctor at a private clinic in Vermont, addressed to my mother. They were dated a year before her wedding to my father. I read, and icy fingers gripped my throat. Eleanora had given birth to a child, a boy, and she had given him up, put him up for adoption. But the most terrible part was something else. In the last letter, the doctor mentioned the name of the child's father, who had come to visit her. Arthur Hammond. Arthur Hammond. The name struck me like an electric shock. He was my father's partner at the dawn of their business. The man David Miller, according to family legend, had thrown out of the company for financial malpractice, after which Hammond supposedly drank himself to ruin and disappeared. My father had built his career on the ruins of his partners. Now I knew why. He wasn't just removing a competitor. He was erasing the man who had been with his future wife before him. He had married Eleanora knowing about her past, knowing she had carried another man's child, and had turned her life into a gilded cage, and her secret into a leash he'd held her on all these years. That was why she had always been so cold. She wasn't a queen, but a prisoner. And her hatred for her situation, her inability to take it out on her husband, had seeped out and poisoned everything around her, especially me. Perhaps I reminded her of what she had been forced to give up, of a life where she could have been free. I sat in my father's study, surrounded by the ghosts of the past. In my hands, I held the keys to all the secret rooms of our family crypt. James's betrayal, the murder my father committed, my mother's tragedy. It was all links in the same chain. The Miller dynasty was built not on labor and genius, but on lies, blood, and broken lives. I carefully folded the letters and took them with me. I had everything I needed. That evening, Catherine returned home. She looked tired, but tried to smile. "Hi, honey. My sister is doing much better. I was so worried." I looked at her, at the woman I thought I knew. Now I saw only a stranger with a beautiful face. I felt nothing but disgust. "I'm glad you're back," I said in a level voice, and the calmness of it made her pupils dilate slightly. "We need to be at the family dinner tonight. Dad is making an important announcement." She nodded, clearly thrown by my tone. "Of course. I'll go get changed." "Catherine," I stopped her at the stairs. "Wear the blue dress. The one I gave you for our anniversary. It looks beautiful on you." For a second, fear flickered in her eyes. She knew that I knew, but she didn't know what I knew. She couldn't imagine the depth of the abyss on whose edge we all stood. I went to my room and put on my best suit. I had to look impeccable, because tonight I wasn't just a cheated husband. I was the executioner. My parents' mansion in Greenwich was a temple of ostentatious perfection. White columns, perfectly manicured lawns, interiors straight from the pages of a luxury living magazine. Inside, it smelled of lilies and furniture polish, the smell of money and sterility. When Catherine and I entered, the others were already gathered in the small drawing room. My father, David Miller, stood by the fireplace, tall, stately, with a mane of white hair that gave him the air of a Roman senator. He held a glass of whiskey. My mother, Eleonora, sat in an armchair, straight as a rod, wearing a pearl necklace that cost more than the average American home. Her face was a flawless mask of aristocratic calm. And James, my brother, he stood next to our father, smiling smugly. He was in a bespoke suit that fit his athletic frame perfectly. When he saw me, his smile widened, becoming patronizing. He came over and clapped me on the shoulder in a brotherly way. He smelled of the same cologne as in the photos from the hotel. "Ethan, good to see you." Ready for the big day, his voice was full of triumph. I looked him straight in the eye. "More than ready, James. Today will be a day to remember." He didn't catch the threat. He was too drunk on the anticipation of power to notice anything. His gaze slid to Catherine, and a barely perceptible spark passed between them, a fraction of a second. But to me, it was brighter than a flash of lightning. Catherine immediately lowered her eyes. She was scared. Good. Dinner was served in the grand dining room. A long mahogany table, polished to a mirror shine, was set with family silver and crystal. We sat down. Servants moved silently around us, filling our glasses with expensive French wine. The conversation was empty and formal, a discussion of a recent merger, plans for a summer vacation in the Hamptons. I was silent, eating slowly, feeling like a spectator in a theater of the absurd. I was the only one in the room who knew the play was approaching its bloody finale. Finally, when dessert was served, my father stood up. He tapped his glass with a knife, though there was no need. A reverent silence already reigned at the table. "Family," he began in his velvet baritone that so captivated shareholders. "I have gathered you here today for a special occasion. As you know, I have dedicated my entire life to building Miller Industries. I built this company from the ground up, turning it into an empire. But time moves on, and it is time to pass the reins to the next generation." He paused, his gaze sweeping over all of us. His eyes lingered on me for a moment longer, and in them I saw what I always saw, slight disappointment. I was smart, reliable, but I wasn't a leader in his eyes. I wasn't James. "I am proud to announce," my father continued, "that as of tomorrow, the position of CEO of Miller Industries will be assumed by my eldest son, James Miller." James beamed. My mother was the first to applaud, restrainedly, but with clear approval. Catherine forced a weak smile and clapped as well. I sat motionless. James stood up to give his acceptance speech, but I beat him to it. I rose as well, holding my wine glass. "Before we proceed to the toast for the new king," I said, and my voice sounded surprisingly loud and clear in the ensuing silence, "I would also like to say a few words. About family, about legacy, about the values on which, as we all believe, the house of Miller stands." All eyes were fixed on me. My father frowned, displeased with the breach of protocol. James looked at me with a smirk, expecting some sentimental nonsense. "Let's start with loyalty," I continued, looking directly at my brother. "James, you've always been an example to me. You taught me to take whatever you want from life, without looking back at the consequences. For example, if you like a woman, you should go after her, even if that woman is your own brother's wife." I took a sip of wine. The silence at the table became deafening. The color slowly drained from James's face. Catherine gripped the tablecloth so tightly her knuckles turned white. "What nonsense are you spouting, Ethan?" James snarled. "Nonsense." I smirked. "I have photos, James. Lots of them. At the Four Seasons Hotel. In your Soho apartment. In my own home, in my bed. Would you like me to describe them in detail? Or perhaps Catherine can help me with the specifics." Catherine sobbed and covered her face with her hands. My mother looked at me with icy horror. "Stop this circus, Ethan," my father intervened, his voice like the cracking of ice. "Whatever has happened between you, it has no place at the family table." "You're wrong, father," I replied, turning to him. "This is exactly the place for it, because we are talking about legacy, and hypocrisy is an integral part of it. Let's move on to the second value, honesty. Tell us, father, about the honesty of Ethelred Holdings. Tell us how honestly you pay senators to turn a blind eye to our factories poisoning rivers in Ohio. Tell us how you honestly built this empire." My father's face turned ashen gray. He opened his mouth but couldn't utter a word. "Or perhaps we should talk about justice?" I didn't give him a chance to recover. "For example, justice for Michael O'Connell. Remember him, father? The shift supervisor who so inconveniently fell into a vat of chemicals 20 years ago. His widow, Sophia, still receives very generous benefits from you. Apparently, the price of silence only goes up over the years." Eleonora gasped. She looked at her husband with genuine horror. It seemed even she didn't know about this part of their family history. You don't know what you're talking about," my father whispered. "Oh, I know much more than you think." My voice grew quieter, almost intimate. I turned to my mother. "And finally, let's talk about love. The unconditional motherly love for which our home is so famous. Right, mother?" She looked at me with hatred. "How dare you? I found your letters, mother, from the clinic in Vermont. I know about the boy, the one you left, and I know who his father was. Arthur Hammond, father's partner, whom he destroyed. What is it like, mother, to live all these years next to the man who forced you to give up your firstborn, and then built his fortune on the ruins of your lover's life? What is it like to look at me and perhaps see something in my features that reminds you of your greatest betrayal?" In that moment, Eleanor Miller's mask cracked. A tear slowly crawled down her cheek, leaving a dark trail on her flawless makeup. James looked from me to our parents, his brain clearly refusing to process the information. Catherine was weeping silently. My father collapsed into his chair, having aged 20 years in 5 minutes. The Miller Empire had fallen. Not from an external enemy, not from a market crash. It collapsed right here, in this lavish dining room, under the weight of its own sins. I placed my glass on the table. "James will not be CEO," I said calmly. "Because as of tomorrow morning, Miller Industries will cease to exist in its current form." A full dossier on Ethelred Holdings, the bribes, and the death of Michael O'Connell was sent by courier this morning to the Securities and Exchange Commission, as well as to a good acquaintance of mine, an investigative journalist at the New York Times. The article will be on the front page tomorrow. I looked at the ruins of my family, at their faces distorted by shock and horror. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction. only an all-consuming, bottomless emptiness. I didn't want money or power, I said, heading for the exit. I just wanted the truth. Enjoy your legacy. I walked out of the dining room, leaving them alone with their demons and the wreckage of their deceitful lives. I passed through the huge hall, past the portraits of our ancestors, who seemed to look down at me with reproach. I opened the heavy front door and stepped into the cool night air. I had done what I had to do. I had brought justice. But standing there in the darkness, I became acutely aware of one thing. By burning their world to the ground, I had burned in the flames along with them. I was free from their lies, but this freedom was like a vacuum. I had destroyed the monsters, but to do so, I had to become the most ruthless of them all. The Miller Empire was built on secrets. I just turned on the light, and light, I now understood, can be as destructive as darkness. I walked away, and behind me, the great house of Miller sank into the silence that comes only after the end of the world. A silence in which nothing living would ever be born again. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left, and thank you for watching.